What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron. Kory, how we doing?
Doing good. Sunday fun day.
Sunday fun day. We're recording a little bit earlier than normal, but still plenty of NBA talk.
Yeah, I mean, we had a busy week nonetheless. I think the last couple nights were a little bit entertaining. I did a lot of my research for Saturday night today, but we had some interesting games last night.
Yeah, the game between the Bulls and Charlotte was crazy. That was one of the wildest endings, I've ever seen personally. But before we get into it, quick reminder, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, OTGbasketball.com, and YouTube. Also head to FOCO USA, use discount code OTGNBA10, save yourself 10% off when you buy 2 NBA items. But Kory, you want to talk a little bit about Chicago and Charlotte?
I mean, we can touch on it quick. Yeah, I think it's an interesting storyline because of the Zach LaVine stuff that came out literally earlier yesterday. For those who don't know, Zach LaVine got benched by Jim Boylen for his lack of effort on defense. There was a couple plays in particular where it looked like he probably should have switched on to the role guy. I can't remember who they were playing exactly, but he should have switched on defense a couple times. He didn't. He got benched for it. He had an interview with Yahoo where he basically said there's no trust between him and Boylen. Like, he doesn't feel like Boylen can trust him. And he doesn't feel like he can trust Boylen because there's that lack of trust. And then fast forward to last night, they are down by 5 with like 14 seconds to go, no timeouts. And it's one of those situations where you're like, this game's over. They hit
I was running the OTG account and I tweeted it was over. I tweeted out asking about what the Bulls should do.
And then Satoransky hits this 3 from Kobe White who balled out once again. And then it's like, all right, they're down by 2. All Charlotte has to do is inbound it, get fouled, and this game's over. Well, they inbound it, and somehow, he pretty much inbounds into a guy who's getting triple teamed. Zach LaVine gets the ball, runs out to the three-point line, and hits his 13th three for the game, 49 points on the night, and gives the Bulls what would be the lead and the win, which is a really just interesting 48 hours for the Chicago Bulls fans and the team in general.
And Zach LaVine, like you mentioned the Q&A with Yahoo, I felt like that was just weird. Like, you don't necessarily see that mid-season, especially about the coach that's still the coach right now. And then he responds by dropping 49 in the game winner and 13 threes. It was weird. He had 49 points and only 2 free throws, which is kind of crazy for Zach LaVine, a guy like cutting to the rim so much. But hey, this could be the type of momentum that boosts Chicago moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe, hopefully, this gives Boylen some more trust in Zach LaVine.
100%. But talking about people who balled out, studs and duds of the week, Kory, who you got for your stud?
So my stud, even though now, again, our studs and duds are not necessarily aligned with winning, but my stud for this week is DeAndre Hunter from the Atlanta Hawks, a guy who coming into the year, was going to be a core piece for this Atlanta Hawks going forward, has struggled at times early on, but he had a really good week. Had 27 points, 11 rebounds against the Bucks. Had an 18 points, 4 assists game against the Pistons. And then last night in a loss against Toronto had 26 and 4. So DeAndre Hunter starting to really get some of those scoring numbers up is really good. I mean, DeAndre Hunter we know is a very good defender as a rookie. So him becoming a more aggressive offensive player was nice to see this week.
And he hit some big shots last night against Toronto. He gave Atlanta a chance to get back in that game. And obviously you want your rookies to pop off, and DeAndre Hunter being one of those guys. You mentioned the defense already being there. Offensively, the steps he's taking just going to further Atlanta, especially when John Collins comes back. But I did not want to do this, but I have to have a repeat. So Luka is going to be my stud of the week. Like, his numbers are just outstanding. 35 points a game, 29 minutes, 57% from the field, 48% from 3, over 12 assists, 9 rebounds. Luka is just like continued to ascend this season. It's remarkable.
Yeah, Luka's honestly been think about it. We have a sophomore guy who people are talking about being the top 5 for the MVP race, which I think is probably accurate right now.
You could say top 3 in my opinion.
Right. We're talking about him also as a top 10 player in the NBA. The fact of the matter is Luka Doncic, even though we can throw shade at the defense isn't great, but also, like, it's kind of hard to put a lot of effort in defensively when you have to do so much offensively. But again, this is a guy who's pretty much, on triple-double watch every night at this point in time. The scoring numbers are ridiculous. I mean, that first quarter against the Golden State Warriors earlier this week was ridiculous. He had like 25 and 5 and 5 after one quarter. He just does it all for that Dallas Mavericks team. I don't know when we're going to start saying when are we going to give Luka Doncic some help, but Luka for sure has been an absolute stud.
Yeah, and these last two games against Golden State and Cleveland, he really didn't have to play the fourth quarter, and he dropped 30-point, almost triple doubles in the second one. The first one he got it. So, and I think the defense on ball isn't amazing, but off ball, I think he makes some heady reads. Helps the team. And like you mentioned, they're essentially just like one star away from being probably true contenders in the West.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about not playing the fourth quarter against the Warriors. He barely played in the second half.
Yeah. Harris Wichard, who was on the show last week, was messaging me, and he was like, "How many minutes do you think he even plays in the second half of this game?"
He's been ridiculous, man. And granted, I saw a couple of people say this. It doesn't really matter that he's doing these against the Warriors in Cleveland. Like, don't take I love when people say, "Oh, well, look at the teams he's putting up these numbers against." He's been doing this all year against everybody. So I don't care if the last couple of games have been against shit teams. This has literally been a normal thing for Luka Doncic.
He did it against the Lakers. Excuse me, against the Lakers and LeBron. Like, he can do it against pretty much anybody in the league. And hey, other guys aren't putting up these numbers when they're facing Cleveland and Golden State. These are just crazy numbers from a really, really good player. But hit me with the duds.
So my duds are actually both on the same team.
That's always a bad sign.
And it's a team that finally got a win last night against the New York Knicks, but it's from the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah.
So my first dud of the week was Brian Forbes, a 3-point marksman for the Spurs, but I think he's 1 for his last 14 from 3. I know he was 0 for 3 or 0 for 4 last night and was like 1 for 8 or 1 for 9 the game before. Which is an odd shooting woe for Brian Forbes, generally a very consistent 3-point shooter. So he's been a low-key dud for me. But then like a high-key dud for this week, but it's almost been for the season at this point, is LaMarcus Aldridge. For some reason this week I caught 2 San Antonio Spurs games. I'm not necessarily sure how that happened because it's not normally a team I catch. But I watched 2 games this week, and it was just so clear and evident that LaMarcus Aldridge is 34 years old. Yes, the shooting numbers are still good. He's shooting like 52% from the field, averaging 18. The rebounding is way down. He just doesn't look as aggressive, doesn't look as fluent out on the court. Like just looks a step slower. And this week he had a couple games. Obviously, San Antonio's been struggling. They lost 8 straight games. And in a couple of the games, it almost felt like if LaMarcus Aldridge of last year was playing, they probably would have won the games. But he's getting out rebounded by a high click. And he just looks slower. So for me, he was a dud of the week, especially for a team that's been struggling like the San Antonio Spurs.
Do you think this is something that's going to carry on for Aldridge all season? Obviously just another year older, maybe got caught up by Father Time.
Sadly, I kind of think so, right? I mean, the guy is averaging 18 points per game and 6.8 rebounds per game. And the fact of the matter is, if you're not rebounding like to a high degree, you need your center to rebound. And if LaMarcus Aldridge is only getting 6 rebounds, there's not a ton of guys on this San Antonio Spurs team that can get a lot of rebounds. I know Jakob Poeltl is probably the guy you're hoping for, but again, he never really plays big minutes for the San Antonio Spurs team. Against Philly, he only had 6 rebounds, and I think they got heavily out-rebounded in that game. Obviously, the Sixers have a bigger
monsters,
and they kind of thrive in the rebounding department. But yeah, I think this may be the norm, is the fact that LaMarcus Aldridge being a little bit slower, being a little bit older, it's just not as easy for him to battle on the boards. I still think he can be an efficient post scorer because, a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge, his game kind of, can last throughout anything because how tall he is, his, patented little post fade. But yeah, it feels like this may be the first time we see the regression. And I think that's a big reason why San Antonio's had these struggles, is because DeMar DeRozan's been really good, but the number 2 guy just has not been a clear-cut number 2 guy.
Yeah, and I mean, the last few seasons, he's maybe even been number 1, and he's been a guy they just depended on a lot. And if he drops off, it's going to be bad for the Spurs, who are having their struggles. Like you mentioned, they ended their losing streak last night, but still not a positive sign because it was against the Knicks, and they gave the Knicks a chance to get back in the game late in that fourth quarter. But I went with Draymond Green here. Obviously Golden State is struggling, but he's averaging 7.5 points per game, 27% from the field, 20% from 3, 8 rebounds. He does have 7 assists and 2 turnovers, but obviously Golden State needs more scoring. Draymond isn't providing that. His shooting numbers are terrible this week, and there's not really much more to say.
Yeah, so we've really seen the negative side of Draymond Green.
And I will give him a slight pass that he is partially injured, but these shooting numbers are really, really bad.
And the fact of the matter is, the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen these numbers on the decline, right? Yep. It's not like this is coming out of nowhere. It's been a steady decline. And now we're seeing Draymond Green without the, the quote-unquote safety net of a Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant how he can kind of get exposed offensively because once again, you just can't rely on Draymond Green for buckets. The assist numbers, yeah, those are solid, 7 assists per game, but also like those are almost inflated because there is no point guard right now with D'Angelo Russell out, so they're kind of having Draymond Green run majority of the offense. So I'm not totally surprised by the 7 assist numbers because somebody's got to facilitate at this point in time for that team. But like you mentioned, the shooting numbers are way down, and yeah, he is a little bit banged up, but I don't know. I mean, we've seen some of the worst parts of Draymond Green this season.
Yeah, he doesn't look as good without his superstar friends. But who else you got in the duds?
No, that was it. Just those two.
Okay, I got another one too. I got Lauri Markkanen, who I think we had mentioned him on the last show. 11 points per game, 27% from the field, 25% from three, just under 7 rebounds, and not even 1 assist. So those numbers are obviously worse than Draymond's. And this last week for Lauri hasn't been great. And he's honestly been a big reason why the Bulls have struggled.
Yeah, I mean, he's another guy that Boylan kind of singled out when he was talking about why the team is struggling. It was Zach LaVine and Lauri Markkanen. And granted, I mean, Boylan's comments aren't really that far off. If we're being honest here, as much as Zach LaVine is a gifted scorer, his defense is definitely a liability. We can see that.
And it's a lot of lazy defense. It's not even like lack of ability defense.
Right. And then Lauri Markkanen, this was a guy that a lot of people were pegging, myself included, to have almost a breakout year. And he's been relatively average to this point in time, right? I think there's been some decent scoring numbers, but hasn't been great on the glass, rebounding, hasn't been great defensively. So again, it just feels like a lack of effort.
Yeah, it really does. And I think because last year when he came back from injury, he looked so good and everyone thought, oh, this guy's going to be a possible all-star next season. This year he just hasn't put it together.
Yeah, no, and for a team that some people had making the playoffs, Zach Lowe over the Pacers, the Chicago team just hasn't been super impressive.
Yeah, I mean, they do not look like a playoff team, but obviously the East is so bad. They're right in the mix. I think they're a game back of the 8th seed, so still a possibility, but we'll see what happens. And talking playoffs, our guy Cam T shared this in the OTG group chat. So on November 20th, essentially most of the teams that are in the playoffs or in the playoff picture are going to be the playoff team. So just looking back at last year, it was Toronto, Milwaukee, Indiana, Philly, Detroit, Boston, Orlando, Charlotte, Brooklyn, and it finished Milwaukee, Toronto, Philly, Boston, Indiana, Brooklyn, Orlando, Detroit, Charlotte. And then on the west side, it was on November 20th, Portland, Memphis, Golden State, Clippers, OKC, Denver, New Orleans, Lakers, and Houston. And it finished Golden State, Denver, Portland, Houston, Utah, OKC, San Antonio, Clippers, and Kings. Now, I know that was a lot of teams to throw at you all at once, but essentially what it is saying is that majority of the teams that are in the playoff picture right now are going to be the playoff teams this year. Do you think that's going to be the case?
I mean, I think it's pretty close, right? I think one team in the Eastern Conference changed. That was the Hornets fell out of the playoff race, and in the West, you had a couple, 2 or 3 teams, right, switch spots from playoff to out. And I think that's pretty accurate because realistically, looking at some of the teams in the bottom of the East, for example, like the Pistons being 5-11, they were a team that we had as like a bubble playoff team. Do we really think the Pistons can bounce back from a 5-11 start and like get into the playoffs? I guess it's possible, but I feel like when certain teams get out to a bad start and you have certain teams, especially like the solid teams, which is what the first 7 teams in the Eastern Conference playoffs are, what spot are you taking if you're already off to a poor spot? Because I feel like, for example, the Pacers and Nets, they're going to get better as the season goes on, not worse. Whereas the Pistons, who are already behind the cue ball, like them getting back up into the playoff race, just a little bit harder. And when you have injuries, it makes that climb even more challenging. So I think relatively in the East, I think it's pretty close to having the 8 teams we see now being the playoff teams.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising. You would think maybe it could change more as the season progresses, but you're right. Like if you get off to a bad start and then some of the other teams that are at the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoffs are necessarily kind of having a bad start themselves, they're just doing better than you are, you're a little bit worried. I think that 8 spot could possibly change, and even the 7 spot with the Nets could possibly change if, injuries continue to happen. But I think I would not be surprised if the Eastern Conference playoff teams are Milwaukee, Boston, Miami, Toronto, Philadelphia, Indiana, Brooklyn, and Orlando.
I wouldn't be either. The one thing we can say is Orlando right now is definitely a big question mark.
Injuries.
You're right. Vucevic out for they're going to reevaluate him in 2 weeks, but at first it was 3 to 4 weeks because of an ankle sprain. Aaron Gordon's out with an ankle sprain. So this is a pretty challenging stretch for them without their arguably 2 best players. They did just lose last night to the Pacers, who are also suffering with a couple injuries. So Orlando could be in a tough spot. And it's interesting the fact that the Wizards are just like right there because their offense, like weird enough, they're somehow third or second in offensive rating still. So they're a weird team to watch.
Yeah, it is really crazy, the Wizards, and even Charlotte right behind them at 6-11. They're obviously not a good team of what we've seen the last few weeks, but Washington gives you maybe a little bit of like, hey, maybe I need to take a peek at them because they do have Bradley Beal, and like you mentioned, offensively they're putting up numbers. And Orlando, you are a little worried because they depend so much on Vucevic. Aaron Gordon hasn't been great, but one guy who maybe they can kind of keep him afloat if he continues to step up, that was Jonathan Isaac, who was huge last night.
Now I have a question. This is a little bit offbeat, but are we positive John Wall's not playing this year?
I'm pretty sure he's been ruled out the entire year.
Okay. Because
Yeah,
I only asked a question because I don't know. I'm sure you saw there was like the highlights the other night against the Celtics where he was like
he threw down a dunk.
yeah, he was in pregame warmups like dribbling between the legs and doing dunks. And I was like, wow, he actually like looks like he's closer to being game ready than I expected. But yeah, I hadn't heard any report. I mean, it makes sense that they're just gonna be cautious because they're not playing for anything. I
Yeah,
thought it was interesting how good he looked. Surprisingly enough, 'cause that was probably the first time I've seen a John Wall on the basketball court highlight in a long time.
I feel like with the Achilles injuries, it's just so much of like stop and go, where
Right.
like some of the motions look okay. Like you see Kevin Durant and Barclays like knocking down threes, like, oh, that's a great sign. But at the end of the day, it's like, can I stop and go? How am I moving laterally and things along those lines? So I think it looks good, but it's like there's still plenty of work probably left.
Yeah.
And talking playoffs on the West side, just to see if we think these teams are going to be the locks. At 1 through 8, we got Lakers, Nuggets, Rockets, Clippers, Jazz, Mavericks, Suns, Timberwolves. Do you think these are going to be the 8 playoff teams in the West?
Um.
I feel good about the top six. Like I think the top six in the West are going to be playoff teams. 7 and 8, they still need to convince me a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I can lock in the top six. Dallas has definitely been impressive to this point in time. I'm super confident in the top five. I'm super confident in the top five.
Yeah,
Dallas, it is a little bit of a favorable schedule to this point in time. Again, I mentioned this. Luka has been great, but I do not like the supporting cast of this Dallas Mavericks team at all. Porzingis has had some solid moments, but even Porzingis still doesn't look like he's in the flow of things. And then outside of Porzingis, I just don't like what they got. I really don't. I think Tim Hardaway Jr. has really regressed. I think Steph Curry is just a weird guy. Like he's a solid 3-point shooter, of course, but you just can't use him in long stretches because he's just not very athletic. So I do have concerns about them. So I think like they would be like I feel somewhat good about them, but at the same time I don't. And then like you mentioned, like the Suns and Minnesota, the Suns have had a nice stretch. We're kind of seeing them fall back to the medium a little bit. Obviously, they dealt with some injuries. Ricky Rubio has missed some time. Aaron Baines has missed some time. And then the Timberwolves, outside, even though Wiggins has had a really good start and Towns has been fantastic, they seem like they're a piece away. And I just can't, in good conscience, say I don't expect San Antonio to kind of get it together or that Portland's going to at least pull something together. Because I think Lillard and McCollum are just too talented for this Blazers team to not be close in the playoff race. But then again, we're looking at another team that's 5-12 and in a tough Western Conference. I just feel like that climb is so much harder.
yeah, and I think for Dallas, no, they're not necessarily amazing, and supporting cast isn't great, but I think Porzingis will continue to get better as the season progresses. There's just not teams I see that are going to be able to jump them. Like San Antonio's already kind of in a hole, Portland's already in a hole, so those teams, like you mentioned, are going to have to improve. San Antonio, I think, has a better chance of improving because they haven't really dealt with injuries. It's just like, hey, we need to play better, but they haven't proven that they necessarily can play good defense, so that's a concern. Portland, I'm really worried about because they just don't have players. Their front court is really depleted. It's a lot of Dame and CJ. And then after that, it's a lot of question marks.
Yeah. I think also like San Antonio and Portland in general, those are the two teams that like I just really feel like there's going to be a trade happening. Like if we're betting on teams to make a trade, like the first teams to make a trade, those would be my two teams to make a trade. I'm not sure if San Antonio trades DeMar. I know we've heard a lot of traction on that or a lot of rumors about that. And even he has said, like, if I get traded, I want to go back east. And the fact that he's even putting out that own kind of quote to me means that he is somewhat wanting out of San Antonio, or at least has definitely thought about it. And then Portland, we've been kind of on the fence of like, can this duo in Portland get it done? And I just realistically think that like Lillard and McCollum just you kind of need to switch it up, and you need to bring in some sort of wing or some sort of power forward to kind of balance out the guard play. And I think McCollum could be a guy we see traded. I think one of these two teams makes the deal probably before the end of this year.
Yeah, and I think if the Spurs trade DeMar, that pretty much signals that they're kind of going into almost a rebuild or just investing in the youth because obviously he's been one of their best players. In Portland, like they have to make a trade because they're just missing so many of their other good players, like Nurkic being out, Zach Collins being out, and other guys being banged up. They just don't have enough talent to compete in the West right now. So a trade is inevitable. If they trade CJ, they need to make sure they're getting a lot back. But I think there's also going to be trades on the table where maybe they don't have to trade CJ and they could use a future pick and kind of catch somebody in a bad situation. But this is kind of a perfect segue into our next segment. Who's been more disappointing to start the year, the Blazers or the Spurs?
Um, I'm gonna have to, even though I truly feel like the Spurs have been more disappointing because we're so accustomed to them being a steady playoff team. They had the longest losing streak underneath Greg Popovich
Ever.
tenure ever. Correct. I know someone posted a picture. It might have been Cam or someone from OTG, and it was like, this is the last time the Spurs lost 8 games in a row. I was like, yes, that's not Greg Popovich as the head coach. But I think the Blazers are more disappointing. Coming off a Western Conference Finals appearance, and the fact of the matter is, you've regressed so heavily. You have so many odds and end pieces. You tried to retool the roster to be more competitive because you've kind of been stuck at this one little hump, and the retool has set you back even farther away than you thought you were. So I think the Blazers have been more disappointing.
Yeah, I really wanted to go with the Spurs here, but I think the Blazers are the right choice, especially because there was some like hype going to the season, like, oh, this team could be better, or they were saying people were sleeping on them. We're just in the Western Conference Finals. Obviously, they had the 2 injuries, but the other guys playing have not been good. So I think the Blazers have been disappointing. And what we did is we also put all these out on Twitter, so we have the results from the fans as well. And the fans went with Blazers as well being more disappointing, 71% to 29% on the Spurs. But
Yeah.
next question: which team has been a bigger disappointment, the Chicago Bulls or the Atlanta Hawks?
I'm gonna say the Atlanta Hawks. Um, because I think the Atlanta Hawks were a team that, even though I know some people were really high on the Bulls, you and me really weren't buying Chicago Bulls stock before this year.
Yeah, I
We
did
thought
not.
they were, right. We thought they were going to be a fun offensive team, but we didn't expect them to really be in the playoff hunt. So they're kind of right where I expected them to be. Granted, the way it's gone down hasn't necessarily been the exact blueprint we laid out, but we had the Hawks being a borderline playoff team. We had this being a team that you didn't want to play on a nightly basis, and even though that's basically been true, they have been a tough out. I didn't expect them to be 4-12 at this point in time. Now, granted, I didn't expect John Collins to be traded. I mean, not traded, suspended because of PEDs. I didn't expect Jabari Parker to get starting minutes either. But yeah, for me, it's the Atlanta Hawks because they've just been way under the win meter than I expected them to be at.
Yeah, I went with Chicago here. I think Atlanta, like you pretty much nailed it. The excuse for them is John Collins is out, and they don't really have a deep front court at all because Jabari Parker is getting big minutes. Alex Len isn't great, and after that, it's just a lot of young guys. So I think Atlanta's getting a little bit of a pass from me, and I felt like they were still kind of farther away. I expected Chicago to be really competitive this year, especially with like adding some of the vets. And it's maybe not as much the record with Chicago. It's just a level of play we see on the court sometimes that they just look so bad. Even a game last night, it took like a buzzer beater 3 to beat Charlotte, Charlotte's been playing really bad the last like week or so, and they couldn't pick up a win against them. It kind of just says something about the level of play in Chicago.
I mean, yeah, after Charlotte's top start, just a note, Charlotte is two for their last 10 in wins. So again,
And it feels that way when you watch them. They just look like the worst team, like they're going to be the worst team in the league.
Yeah.
The fans in this one went with the Bulls at 71% to 29%. Now, moving to the West, we got the Sacramento Kings or the Pelicans. Who's been more disappointing?
Kings. And I say Kings because with the Pelicans, there's just been so many injuries. I mean, it's disappointing from a fan point of view because we haven't really seen the Pelicans healthy, and we haven't seen this young roster all out there at the same time. We've seen a lot of odds and ends, and they've still been a very fun team to watch, but they're just losing. But for me, it's just been one of those situations where you have injuries, you have a young team to begin with, so I'm not really concerned. And again, like, Pelicans have probably been the team I've watched the second most this year, and almost every game they're in it. So I'm not overly disappointed by how they played so far. But on the flip side, the Kings, this was a team I thought was going to be a borderline playoff team. And granted, they've been playing better as of late. Oddly enough, since De'Aaron Fox went down is when this team has started to really pick it up and start winning games. But again, they just haven't been as good as I expected after some of the big time moves, well, not big time moves, after some of the veterans they brought in this offseason. So for me, I think the Kings have been more disappointing.
I agree. I think the Kings are majority have the same core going to the season. You kind of expect bigger things from them to kind of pick up and get better. And they just had stretches where they look really bad. Like you mentioned, they've picked it up a little bit of late, but still, New Orleans has just been killed with injuries from Drew Holiday to Lonzo Ball to Brandon Ingram, and obviously Zion missing time. So I think
And
there's more of
Favors,
a yeah,
the Favors missed a ton of time. I
yeah.
feel like he just got back in the 2020 game, then he hasn't played since, I believe.
I've kind of enjoyed him not being there because you get to watch Jackson Hayes, but
He's a baller.
yeah, he's a baller. So I think New Orleans is more of like you said it. It's disappointing from the guys not being able to play, but the level of play, considering what they have, is fine. Sacramento, you just expect to be better. And the fans feel the same way. Kings 58%, Pelicans 42%.
Really close though. I'm
Yeah.
actually kind of surprised that one's that close. But again, I think from a disappointment, some people may have voted even on that because the fact that there are injuries that is disappointing. So I could see that because not being able to see Zion through this point in the season is definitely obviously disappointing because this was a guy that we've talked about so much this year going into the year, and we just haven't seen him yet, obviously.
Yeah, and there was just so much hype, and even like the marketing from the NBA, you were just expecting a full dose of Zion, and it's been almost like a missing part of the NBA season. But
Can I
getting
ask you a
to,
question before we
yeah,
move on to the next one? Can I ask you a question? Because I've seen this a lot, and this kind of stems from one of the tweets I had the other night in OTG, where I tweeted the young core of Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson is really promising. And there was a lot of people who were like, "Nah, man, Lonzo Ball sucks." And I just wanted to know your opinion or thought on Lonzo. Is Lonzo bad? Are we done with Lonzo? Because I wasn't aware that we were already canceling Lonzo Ball because from what I've seen this year, I like the pace he plays with. I like his confidence, at least in trying to take jump shots. Granted, not so great finishing around the rim. I think the defense is still good, the playmaking, the rebounding. Obviously, he's had a couple injuries, but are we sure Lonzo isn't good? Is that what we're doing now?
I feel like Lonzo right now gets that incomplete grade where we have just not seen enough of Lonzo Ball. Like it feels like he's missing time. He's always banged up. Like what we've seen, he's shown some nice promise, but there's still things he has to correct. But like any young NBA player, he's not going to be able to get better until he gets more time on an NBA court.
Yeah, okay, I think that's fair.
Yeah, like I just think I remember watching him a few times this season, be like, oh wow, he's playing pretty well, and then I go to watch New Orleans again, he's either injured or he's just not getting enough minutes, and I don't know if it's him not stepping up or just like him being banged up this season, but I think we'll have a better idea of the player Lonzo Ball is after the season, long as he plays 60 games.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But getting to the positive side, the impressive stuff, who's been more impressive, the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics?
Man, see, this was a tough one because I think both teams, to their own credit, have been extremely impressive.
And it's
But
funny is because I'm asking you all these questions today, and then like all these teams had interesting performances the night before. That would make you lean one way or the other.
right, yeah, especially Miami, right? They got blown
Yep.
out, 113-86. I'm gonna say more impressive has been the Celtics. Now, granted, they have a couple injuries now. Kemba Walker suffered a scary neck injury. Luckily, it doesn't seem to be anything serious, but he doesn't seem to be able to play tonight due to the neck strain. But we went into the year and I kind of felt like we knew that as long as Jimmy Butler wasn't a head case, that they were probably going to be all right because they had like at least a complete roster with some depth. But we had some serious front court concerns when it comes to the Boston Celtics, right? Enes Kanter was going to be a center. Robert Williams was going to have to get a lot of time. Daniel Theis was going to get a lot of time, and this team rattled off, 8 straight wins. They were sitting atop the Eastern Conference. Jaylen Brown is in the most improved conversation. Jason Tatum's in the most improved conversation. Before Hayward got hurt, he was really starting to find his old rhythm, like Utah Jazz days. Kemba Walker is just like the perfect kind of Brad Stevens point guard. Like I'm not gonna, run or like hold the ball so much in like a Kyrie focused offense, but I'm just gonna do my job as a point guard, get other guys involved, score when I need to. So I just feel like the Celtics have kind of gotten their Brad Stevens aura back, where they're just playing a lot of good team basketball. Of course, now we're dealing with some injuries, but I think the Celtics have been just more impressive because I wasn't necessarily expecting, Jaylen Brown to take this kind of jump. I think we all kind of anticipated Tatum to take it, but not so much Brown. I think Smart's been good. They've gotten like Wanamaker's been really good for them off the bench. They just had some really good guys step up. So for me, I think it's been the Celtics.
For me, I'm actually going to go with the Miami Heat. I did not think the Heat would be this good going to the season. Obviously, last night they got killed, but that was kind of just an outlier. You don't get blown out by 40 every night. It's just not what happens.
There's
But
also a back-to-back, right?
Yeah, and they just didn't play well, and Philly just had it going to that game. They just had some extra energy and juice, and they're just a more talented team. But Boston, I think I had expectations. I didn't know if they'd be this good early on. I thought they'd be good by the end of the season because they had so many young pieces, but they're just clicking it all together, and guys are stepping up. There obviously is a better energy on that team. And getting back to the Miami side, a guy like Bam is really taking a jump. Like he's probably moved into the top 10 center conversation with his all-around ability, and then just other young players in that team really stepping up. I mean, I thought Miami would be a playoff team, but I didn't know they'd be competing for home court, and it feels like that's what they're going to be doing this season.
Yeah, I mean, so just to touch on the Miami Heat, I mean, I think you're right. I probably didn't expect this from the Heat. I had them, right up in the middle of the Eastern Conference in the playoff race. For me, what's been the biggest thing is just like this just looks like the best version of Jimmy Butler I've ever seen. Now, granted, the 3-point number isn't great. He's shooting like 27% from three. But the fact of the matter is, almost 3 steals per game, almost 7 assists per game, almost 6 rebounds per game. He just does everything for this team, like just a little bit of everything. And watching him out there, it just looks like he's in his element. As you mentioned, Bam Adebayo has been really good. Duncan Robinson had that career 3-point shooting night. They've just had a lot of weird guys step up. Like Kendrick Nunn is going to be in the Rookie of the Year conversation probably for majority of the year if he keeps this up. So you're probably right. They are probably more surprising in the sense that we've seen just like guys necessarily name-wise that aren't big step up.
Yeah, it's been impressive. Erik Spoelstra, great job. Both teams, I think, have been really impressive, though. Like the Celtics could have easily won here. The fans went 59% Heat, 41% Celtics. But next question, who's been more impressive, the Phoenix Suns or the Minnesota Timberwolves?
Oh man, it's a tough one because
I went with Phoenix here because I could see Minnesota being a fringe playoff team. I had no idea in my brain that I would think Phoenix would be a fringe playoff team.
Yeah, I'm going to lean with Phoenix as well because I think I had them definitely in the bottom of the Western Conference again.
They were at least bottom 3 for me.
Yeah. I didn't expect Ricky Rubio to have this kind of impact on the team. I also didn't expect Monty Williams to get this team just looking like an actual team so quickly. Obviously, especially after the DeAndre Ayton gets suspended the first game, all of a sudden we have the Aaron Baines, career year. So I think the Suns have definitely been that team that's been more impressive. But I will say, to the Timberwolves' credit, shout out to Andrew Wiggins because I don't think any of us either expected Andrew Wiggins to become, worth that max deal that he got last year.
Yeah, he's definitely improving and becoming a solid NBA player. I don't know if he's worth his deal yet, but yeah, they at least feel more confident about it. And then Karl-Anthony Towns has just been a straight-up monster.
Yeah.
And the fans here went 73% Phoenix, 27% Minnesota. And last one, which team has been more impressive, the Charlotte Hornets or the Washington Wizards?
Washington Wizards. I think if you asked me this question a week ago, I probably would have said Hornets. But as we mentioned, they're 2 for their last 10. They've started to kind of fall back to the mean. I will say Terry Rozier, actually, his numbers aren't bad this year so far. He's actually been playing decent, and so has Graham, obviously, Devontae Graham. He's been a scoring punch for them. But for me, the Wizards have been more impressive. Fact of the matter is, they're top 5 in offensive rating. It shows how talented I think Bradley Beal is to a degree. It's great to see Isaiah Thomas playing decent basketball again. I don't think he's anywhere near his Boston Celtics days, but he's back to being a positive offensive player for this Wizards team. And you got guys like Mo Wagner having some decent stretches. Thomas Bryant's been really good for them as well. So for me, it's been the Wizards. They've had a very good start to the season for a team that, I didn't even think they were going to be winning this many games early. I thought this was going to be a team that was going to struggle to find offense outside of Bradley Beal, and that has not been the case.
Yeah, and you're right. The fact that you said, if you asked me a week ago, I probably would have said Charlotte, but I'm going to go with Washington here just because Charlotte's looked more like a really bad team, where Washington's just like offensively, like you mentioned 100 times, has just been popping off, and guys are scoring and stepping up, and it's been a surprise. The fans here, though, went with the Hornets at 76% and the Wizards with 24%.
I mean, I think it's fair because again, the Hornets, they have way more wins than anyone anticipated. Like they're already 10 wins away from breaking my prediction of 16 wins.
They already have their 2019 win total like sealed up. Like,
right, exactly, yeah. But also, like I don't know, like Davis Bertans too. Like the Wizards have just had some nice weird guys like pop off. Like him shooting 46% from the field, 44% from three makes you wonder why the Spurs let him go.
I don't think that they kind of wanted to not let him go. They thought they were going to get Marcus Morris, but even in that scenario, I would have preferred Bertans, who was one of the top 3-point shooters in the league last season.
Yeah. It's been interesting.
He's my like one of my early favorites for like a trade target. I think teams are going to be looking to get him. He's a nice stretch forward he can bring off the bench. Washington's going to be looking to get assets. Why not make the move?
Yeah.
But getting to games of the week, Kory, starting on Monday night, what are you looking forward to? We got a full slate.
Yeah, so Monday night we're back to full slate of basketball to start the week. My Pacers play the Grizzlies, so I want to say I am interested to see John Morant once again up close because we
He
didn't
was
mention
fun last night.
we didn't mention him for stud of the week, but he should have been probably an honorable mention because against the Lakers, I can't remember who he played early on in the week, but he's just been fantastic. He's really starting to find his rhythm. But my game of the week is the Sixers versus Raptors. It's not a true rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals, but again, we're going to be seeing the Pascal Siakam-led Raptors against the Ben Simmons/Joel Embiid-led 76ers, and I think that will be a very good game.
Yeah, that should be a fun one. Obviously, Toronto's been impressive. I think an honorable mention here would be Utah and Milwaukee. Obviously, two big-time players and two big-time international players in Rudy Gobert and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But Tuesday night, only two games, and they're both at weird time slots at 8:30 and 9 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, I think the easy choice for this is Clippers Mavericks.
Yeah.
We're gonna see, I'm not sure. I'm guessing we're gonna see Kawhi. So we'll see the fully healthy Clippers against the fully healthy Mavericks, and that should be entertaining because I think so far we've got a small sample size of the Paul George Kawhi Leonard combo, and it's been solid to this point. Obviously, they had an interesting win against the Rockets. There was a couple weird things that happened near the end of that game that, like Doc Rivers being literally, halfway onto the court trying to call a timeout. Timeout doesn't get called. Lou Williams hits a three that kind of changes the entire complexion of the end of that game. But yeah, I think that's got to be the game of the night.
100%. Obviously Denver, Washington, nothing too crazy. And then Wednesday night, the entire league is playing on Thanksgiving Eve.
Yeah. So the bias in me wants to say Pacers Utah is the game of the night, but I won't go that way. I'm actually going to lean towards, surprisingly enough, Heat Rockets. Kind of different philosophies. The Heat kind of lean towards their defense. Rockets lean towards their offense.
Do you remember what happened last time they played?
I don't.
Miami blew out Houston like crazy numbers. It was like a 20 to 30 point blowout from the first quarter on. And it was like one of the first games of the season where Houston looked terrible. Yeah,
it was 129 to 100 to be exact on November 3rd. Wow, I'm looking at the numbers of that game. So the Miami Heat had 38 assists.
Yeah, it was a crazy game from the start.
Yeah. So I think that's the game of the night.
It'll be interesting to see how Houston bounces back because you don't forget about that, especially like this early into the season. Ideally on this night, it would have been Brooklyn and Boston, but now Kyrie's not playing that game. And then also looks like Kemba might not be playing. So I think you lean towards Miami and Houston being one of the top matchups. You could look at some other things too here. I mean, there's a couple interesting storylines. You got AD returning to New Orleans.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, it's not for this many games. There's not that many crazy matchups, but I'm sure there'll be some that really pop off.
Yeah, I will say, I think the Hawks-Bucks matchup
I was looking at that too.
I mean, their last matchup was earlier this week, and it was 135-127 finish. That was when DeAndre Hunter had his big 27-11 game. So I think that game is a little bit intriguing because just the way the Hawks play basketball, even though they've been somewhat disappointing with their record, they still are in a lot of these games, and the Bucks just really haven't figured it out yet, I feel like.
Yeah, agreed. Thursday night, no games. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. You can enjoy some football. Friday night, or Friday and Friday night, because we do have one day game.
Weird day game. I'm not really sure
12 o'clock, that's so early. Like, now I have to rush home from Poughkeepsie to get back to Stanford so I could set up in my office to watch the game.
Well, hopefully the rush back will be worth it. You'll get a Kyrie Kemba, little duo going there or a matchup going there.
I doubt. I honestly feel like neither of them are going to play in both games. That's just my feel right now, but who knows? Especially the early 12 o'clock start. If it was a late night, then maybe an extra day of rest. Maybe we'll get them out there. But I think because it's at noon, they're just going to be like, all right, guys, just sit. You're happy. And usually, this noon start the day after Thanksgiving is so bad. I'm pretty sure the Nets have played this matchup the last two seasons, and both teams just come out so lethargic to start the game.
Yeah, I mean, you still got the food coma hangover, right?
You still got turkey in your system, you're still stuffed. It's just a bad idea.
Friday in general, just looking at this slate, not a great slate. Not great. You got like a lot of decent teams playing against shitty teams.
Yeah.
For Friday night. But the matchup I went with is Maverick Suns.
Uh,
Two promising teams, two teams that have been on the rise a little bit. But again, it was kind of tough to figure out what game I actually like wanted to marquee. Obviously, my Pacers playing the Hawks, I think, is up there for me. But
I think
a
that's
lot
a
of
pretty good game. That's probably one of the better games of the night
yeah, it probably is honestly.
because
I'm
they're also
guessing
like very
Brogdon will
different.
be healthy by then because Brogdon was questionable for last night against the Magic. I'm guessing by next Friday he should be back from his sore back.
Yeah, and then obviously the Hawks do a great job of keeping games interesting. I mean, I think Boston and Brooklyn will still be a pretty good game because it'll be the second time they play in 3 days, so it'll most likely be a close matchup because it's the second one. But moving on to Saturday night, what are you rolling with?
Saturday. This is also a small slate for Saturday.
Really small for Saturday too.
Yeah,
Usually Saturday you at least get five, and then you usually have at least one early game.
yeah. So only 4 games. For this, it's funny. I feel like I went with a lot of Hawks this week. It feels like, but I'm going with Hawks Rockets because I think, I mean, Pacers Sixers should be entertaining. You know, battle of a lot of big men. But I think Hawks Rockets because of the offensive promise that those two teams are going to put out. That'd probably be my game of the week.
I agree. Yeah, just like Hawks and Rockets, there could just be some. You could see 130 to 135, or even 140 in that game. I think Denver and Sacramento will be fun. At least this slate has pretty good games all around, other than Charlotte and Milwaukee.
I know we don't normally touch on the Sunday game, but like Sunday, December 1st, following that Saturday, that is a day full of good basketball.
It's weird. There's hardly any games on Saturday, and then there's 9 games on Sunday.
And good matchup Sunday. You start
Yeah.
off, you got Nets Heat, which I think is good. Grizzlies Timberwolves is fun because you got like the young teams going against each other. You get the Mavericks Lakers rematch from a couple weeks ago when they had their overtime game. And I think, Utah versus Toronto, solid. And then Wizards versus LA, that's not a terrible matchup with how the Wizards offense plays.
Yeah. We'll start off December right, but that wraps it up. Kory, always a pleasure talking hoops with you. Big thanks to everybody listening. You can subscribe and review on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. Also find us on otgbasketball.com. And like I mentioned, use discount code OTGNBA10. Save yourself 10% off 2 FOCO USA items when you buy 2 or more.
Peace out, knuckleheads.